The envelope was already on her desk when she arrived at 6 a.m. Tatum noticed it before she noticed anything else, before the fluorescent light flickering in the corner of the break room, before the smell of burnt coffee that had been sitting on the burner since the night shift, before the fact that someone had moved her chair 3 inches to the left and never put it back. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, the kind of paper that cost more per sheet than she made in an hour. Her name was written on the front in ink so dark it looked wet. No return address, no stamp, just Tatum Reyes in handwriting that was almost architectural, precise, deliberate, each letter the same height as the last. She didn't open it right away. She sat down, booted up her ancient desktop, poured herself a cup of the bad coffee, and looked at the envelope for 11 minutes before she picked it up. That was how Tatum operated. She watched things before she touched them. She had learned that the hard way in a trailer outside Odessa, Texas, watching her mother sign papers she didn't read, watching everything they owned get loaded into a truck that belonged to someone who had smiled the whole time. The envelope contained a single card. On it, 4 words and a time. Tonight, 9 p.m. Meridian. That was all. Meridian was a restaurant on the 42nd floor of the Callaway building downtown. Tatum had never been inside, but she'd looked at it the way you look at something that isn't meant for you, the way you press your nose to the glass of a car dealership at closing time. She passed it every morning on her walk from the bus stop. The lobby alone had a chandelier that was probably worth more than the entire block she'd grown up on. She turned the card over. Blank. She should have thrown it away. Any reasonable person would have. An anonymous summons to a restaurant she couldn't afford, with no explanation, no name, no context. She had a 12-hour shift at Aldridge Financial. She was the senior accounts reconciler for a firm that processed payroll for mid-size companies across 4 states, which meant she spent her days finding other people's mistakes and cleaning them up without being thanked for it. She had $43 in her checking account until Friday. She had a left shoe with a sole that was separating at the toe, held together with a thin line of superglue she reapplied every Sunday night. She had no reason to go. She went. She wore the black dress she'd bought for her aunt's funeral 3 years ago. It still fit, which was either a good sign or a sign that she hadn't been eating enough. She chose not to think about which. She borrowed a coat from her coworker Penny and stood outside the Callaway building at 8:53 p.m., looking up at the lights on the 42nd floor and feeling, for one specific moment, like the trailer park had followed her all the way downtown. The maitre d' didn't blink when she gave her name. He led her past tables where people laughed at volumes that suggested they had never once worried about being too loud, past walls that were covered in something that looked like raw silk, to a corner table partially screened by a divider of frosted glass. The man sitting at the table didn't stand when she approached. He was looking at his phone. He set it face down when she sat across from him, and that single gesture told her more than anything else would for the next hour. The way he gave something his complete attention the moment it required it, like a switch. Like there was no in-between. His name, she would learn later, was Creed. Just Creed. No first name offered, no handshake. He was older than she'd imagined, though she hadn't let herself imagine much. Mid-40s, maybe. Dark hair gone silver at the temples. A face that had been handsome once and had accumulated something harder on top of it over the years. A scar along his jaw, thin and pale, like someone had tried to write something on him and thought better of it. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her rent, and he wore it the way men wear things they've stopped noticing. "You came," he said. It wasn't surprise, it was confirmation. Like he'd already marked it in a column. "You sent a very good envelope," Tatum said. Something in his expression shifted. Not a smile. More like the idea of one being considered and set aside. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "I know what you're not," she said. "You're not from Aldridge, and you're not from any of the 14 companies whose accounts I manage." She paused. I'd have recognized the letterhead. He studied her for a moment. "You ran a background check on the restaurant. I ran a background check on the building. The restaurant leases the 42nd floor. The building is owned by a shell company registered in Delaware. She picked up the menu, looked at it, set it down. Meridian Holdings, LLC, which is a subsidiary of Veritas Capital Group, which traces back, eventually, to a private equity firm that doesn't have a public-facing name or a website. Creed said nothing. "I'm an accountant," Tatum said. "Numbers talk. I just listen." He leaned back in his chair, barely, just a few degrees, and looked at her the way she imagined he looked at everything, like he was calculating weight. "I have a problem," he said. "Most people who send anonymous envelopes do. My CFO resigned 3 weeks ago, voluntarily, in the sense that I gave him the option." A pause. "The books are a mess. Not from incompetence. From deliberate misdirection. Someone has been moving money through accounts in patterns designed to look like operational expenses. 47 accounts across 9 different business entities. The amounts are small enough to miss individually. The pattern is not." Tatum felt something tighten in her chest, not fear. The thing that happened when a problem became interesting. "How long?" she asked. "Best estimate, 31 months. And you want me to find it. I want you to unwind it." He reached into his jacket pocket and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "That's what I'm willing to pay." She unfolded it. She didn't react, because she'd learned a long time ago that reacting was a form of leverage you handed to someone else. But her eyes read the number twice, and both times it said the same thing. It was more money than she made in 3 years. "Why me?" she asked. "Specifically, because you flagged a $340 discrepancy in a trust account 2 years ago that saved a client $11 million. Because you did it on your own time, without being asked, and you didn't ask for anything in return." He let that sit. "And because you haven't mentioned calling anyone since you sat down. Most people, when they understand what kind of man I am, think about exits." Tatum set the paper down on the table and smoothed the fold with her thumb. "What kind of man are you?" "The kind," Creed said, "that doesn't ask twice." She told herself she was going to sleep on it. She did not sleep on it. She was back at her desk at midnight, and she stayed there until 4 in the morning, running the math on what that number could do. It could pay off her mother's medical debt, all of it, the full amount, the number she'd been making minimum payments on for 6 years, while it sat there accruing interest like something alive. It could be 6 months of not panicking about her checking account. It could be, if she was careful, the start of something that didn't depend on someone else being reasonable. She called the number on the back of the card at 7 a.m. A man answered who was not Creed. He told her where to go and when to be there. He did not say please. The office was on the 3rd floor of a building that looked like it housed a law firm, or maybe an insurance company. The kind of building that was deliberately forgettable. Inside, past a lobby that had 2 security cameras and a man at the desk who looked he knew how to use his hands in ways that weren't related to typing, there was a room with a long table and boxes. So many boxes. 47 accounts. 31 months. 9 business entities. Tatum put on her glasses, opened her laptop, and got to work. Creed was not what she expected him to be. Up close and over time. She had expected someone who left a wake, the kind of man who walked into a room and changed the temperature. He did that, but not the way she'd anticipated. It was quieter than that, more like a pressure change. Like the air adjusted to accommodate him and forgot to tell you it was doing it. He came to the office every other morning. He would stand in the doorway and look at whatever she had up on her screen. And sometimes he asked questions, and sometimes he just looked, and she had the feeling that whether or not he asked, he understood the answer. He brought coffee exactly once in the 2nd week. He set it next to her laptop without comment. She didn't thank him. He didn't seem to expect her to. She found the first thread on day 6, a series of transfers moving through what appeared to be vendor payments, a landscaping company that, when she looked closely, had a business address that turned out to be a UPS store in Phoenix. The amounts were irregular enough to look organic. The timing was not. She pulled the pattern out and laid it flat in a spreadsheet, and it was, when you could see all of it at once, almost elegant. Whoever had built it understood that the best place to hide something was inside the noise of normal operations. She documented everything. She didn't go to Creed with half answers. On day 9, she had enough for a full picture. She brought it to him in a printed report, 22 pages, because she still didn't fully trust the security on the shared drive. She set it on his desk and stood on the other side and waited while he read. He read all of it. That was not a small thing. Most people skimmed. Creed read. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her with an expression she couldn't categorize. "You found 4 I didn't know about," he said. "5, she said. Page 19. The last one's small, but it's been running longest, 18 months before the others started." He turned to page 19. He was quiet for a while. "The person who built this," he said, not quite asking. "Used to work in a bank," Tatum said. "Probably compliance, based on the methodology. They knew exactly where auditors look, so they put everything just outside that range." She paused. "It's not the work of someone who hated you. It's the work of someone who thought you wouldn't notice." Something in his jaw moved. One specific muscle, just once. "Thank you," he said. Tatum had been thanked for her work exactly once in 6 years at Aldridge Financial. It had been in an email that also contained 4 other agenda items. She didn't know what to do with the directness of it. "I'll finish the rest of the documentation today," she said, and left before she had to figure out how to handle her own face. She didn't go back to Aldridge. She hadn't intended for that to happen. She'd told Penny she needed a personal day, and then another, and when she came back on the 3rd day to collect her things and hand in her badge, Penny looked at her with an expression that was half concern and half envy and said, "Where are you going?" And Tatum said, "I don't know yet." And Penny hugged her, and Tatum stood inside the hug and felt something release in her chest that she hadn't known was wound that tight. She had worked at Aldridge for 6 years. She had been passed over for promotion twice. The second time, the person promoted above her had come to her 3 weeks later asking her to explain a concept he hadn't understood in the interview. She had explained it. She had smiled while she did it. She was done smiling at things that deserved a different response. The problem, if it was a problem, and Tatum told herself she was still deciding, was Creed himself. Not what he was. She'd understood what he was from the moment she identified those shell companies. She wasn't naive, and she wasn't pretending. The money that moved through his network came from places she didn't ask about, and he didn't explain, and she had made a choice, eyes open, to sit down at the table and open the laptop. She wasn't going to walk that back now by pretending she hadn't known. The problem was the way he talked to her. Not softly. He wasn't soft, but directly, the way people talked when they'd decided you were worth the full truth. He asked for her opinion on things he hadn't hired her for. A restructuring question, once, about whether a certain consolidation made sense operationally, and she'd told him no and explained why, and he'd nodded and said, "I thought the same," and no posturing, no need to be right first. She noticed small things. He remembered what she'd told him, verbatim, sometimes days later. He didn't interrupt. When she'd showed up on a Tuesday with a headache so bad she could barely read her screen, he had his assistant move 2 of the afternoon meetings without being asked, and he didn't mention it. She tried to make these things mean nothing. She was very good at numbers. She was less good at the calculations required here. 3 weeks into the work, a man showed up at the office whom Creed referred to only as Sloan. Sloan was younger than Creed by maybe 10 years, and wore the particular expression of someone who'd made a lot of enemies and considered this a point of pride. He came in on a Wednesday, when Tatum was cross-referencing account logs, and he sat down across from her, without asking, and looked at her the way men sometimes looked at her when they wanted her to know they'd already made up their minds about her. "You're the bookkeeper," he said. "Accounts analyst," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Same thing, sure," Tatum said. "And you're whatever you are." A pause. She heard him lean forward. "The work you're doing," he said. "When you're done, there's a gap. A long one, between what's on paper and what's real." His voice dropped, just slightly. "Valuable as information. The kind of thing that has a market." Tatum saved her spreadsheet, closed the lid of her laptop, looked at him. "What you're describing," she said, "would require me to either copy documents that aren't mine or retain information past the scope of my contract. It would pay. I heard you." She held his gaze. I'm going to finish this conversation now. Not because I'm scared of you. Because you've been here 4 minutes, and you've already wasted more of my time than you're worth. She opened her laptop. He didn't move right away. Then he did. She told Creed about it that afternoon. Not because she thought it was her place. Not because she was looking for protection. Because she kept her own books, and she had decided early in her life that the only ledger that mattered was the one she maintained for herself. He listened. He didn't say he was sorry. He said, "He won't come back." "I know," Tatum said. "I'm telling you because you have a problem inside your network, and the timeline suggests it predates my arrival, and I don't leave open items in a report." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one where he was recalibrating something. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "I'm cautious," she said. "It's different. Most people don't make that distinction. Most people don't read footnotes either." She turned back to her screen. That's how they miss things. The night everything shifted, it was raining. Tatum was the last one in the office. She'd been there since 7 in the morning, and it was now past 10, and she was running a final verification on the restored accounts, checking her own work the way she always did, because she'd learned that the best defense against error was you yourself, going back over everything with fresh eyes and a willingness to find your own mistakes. She heard the door. Creed came in without his jacket, which was new. She had never seen him without his jacket. He sat in the chair across from her work table and said nothing for a moment. "Sloan," he said, confirmed. She understood what that meant. She didn't ask for specifics. "How long did you know?" she asked instead. "I suspected 2 months ago. I needed proof that didn't come from inside my own people." He paused. "The pattern you found in the Phoenix accounts, that was the cleanest thread," she agreed. "External. Documentable, not dependent on testimony." He nodded slowly. The office was quiet except for the rain against the windows. There was something different in the room that she didn't want to name. "The work is done," he said. "Or close to it. 3 days," Tatum said. "I want to run the final audit myself, and after that..." She looked at her laptop screen. The spreadsheet was almost beautiful when it was clean. All the columns aligned, all the numbers in their right places, no loose threads. She had untangled something that had been deliberately knotted, and she had done it in 23 days, and part of her didn't want to put it down. "I don't know," she said, honestly. Creed was quiet. She waited. "There's a position," he said. "Not the CFO role, something adjacent. Someone to watch the numbers on an ongoing basis across all entities. Quarterly reviews, anomaly flagging, structural recommendations." He paused. "The pay is, I don't care about the pay yet," Tatum said. "I care about the scope, full access. Reporting directly to you. Yes, and if I find something you don't like, then you tell me," he said. "That's the job." Tatum looked at him, the scar along his jaw, the silver at his temples, the way he sat in a chair like he'd sat in 1,000 chairs that mattered more than this one and hadn't broken yet. She thought about Aldridge, the fluorescent light, the 6 years, the email with 4 other agenda items. "I'll finish the audit," she said. "And then I'll tell you." It wasn't yes, it also wasn't no. And Creed, to his credit, didn't push. He nodded once, stood, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. At the door he paused. "Tatum." She looked up. "The $340 account," he said. "The one that saved the client $11 million. Did you know it would be that?" She thought back. A number that was wrong by less than half a cent per unit, multiplied across 18 months of transactions. "No," she said. "I just knew it was wrong, and wrong things compound." He held her gaze for a moment. "Yes," he said, "they do." He left. She turned back to her screen. The numbers were clean and orderly and quiet the way she liked them. Outside, the rain kept coming. She pulled up the final audit file, cracked her knuckles once, and kept working. She didn't know yet what she would say in 3 days. But she knew, with the same certainty she had always trusted more than anything else, that it would be the exact truth, and whatever came next, she would walk into it with her eyes open, her own books balanced, and nothing owed.